How's everybody doing today? And welcome to Horror and Stuff. Today I'm going to be ranking all of Rob Zombie's live action films. This is not going to include the animated film El Super Bisto. I have not seen that film. I do plan on watching it at some point, but I still have not. But yeah, Rob Zombie as a director seems to get a lot of hate um, for his movies, and I don't think that it's entirely deserved. Um, his movies are extremely brutal. There are elements to them, like the excessive nudity, that I think is out of place at times, or a little too excessive. But overall, I think that Rob Zombie is somebody that has great ideas, but falls short on execution sometimes. But let's get into the list. And coming in at number 7 is Lords of Salem. And this isn't actually a bad movie. It was just extremely boring. It had some really interesting visuals at times, but the overall story, the scaled down uh, nature of this movie, sorry about the cat, the scaled down nature of this movie, and just the pacing is so hard to watch. This was the hardest one for me to watch, not because it's bad, just because I got really bored a lot watching this film. It almost feels like a college grad student's art presentation. It is very artistic. There are beautiful set pieces, uh, lots of interesting corridors and hallways, and um, just these grand uh, open rooms in some cases, like going from this really enclosed long hallway into this grand ballroom almost. And so there are visually, it is a very nice movie to watch. Like I said, it's like an art piece. But as far as the story goes and uh, the characters, which are some of the things that I love Rob Zombie's movies for, are his characters. Um, that was missing from this movie. And yeah, that's why it is at number 7. Okay, and coming in at number 6 is the movie that everybody seems to just despise, and that is Rob Zombie's Halloween 2. And I get why people would be upset with this movie, especially after the strong performance of his first movie, at least in my opinion. Um, but what's interesting is the first movie is a pretty strong recreation of the original. The beginning of this film, of Halloween 2, is um, is a callback, a love letter, shall we say, to the original Halloween 2. But I don't like the original Halloween 2. But I did like the beginning of this movie and the direction that it seemed like it was going. Um, if they would have done, if he would have done his recreation of the original Halloween 2 and changed it up in a very Rob Zombie way, and gave us some of the brutal visuals that we got in the hospital at the beginning of this movie, and that was the movie that we were given, this could have been fantastic. But this is absolutely one of his movies that definitely he had a lot of really good ideas. Just the execution was very flawed. Um, I don't think this is necessarily it. Let me actually say this. This is a bad movie. This could have been two good movies. This seems like it has two very different ideas going at the same time and merged into one film, where you have your an actual Halloween slasher film, and then you have this uh, cerebral, um, like uh, psychic vision film that seems like it should have nothing to do with this Halloween film. And if he would have just stuck with just the actual like Halloween slasher film and got rid of all of the weird uh, dream sequences and uh, seeing the different, the dead mother and all of that stuff, this would have been a much better film. I know why he chose to do that because of how he chose to end the film, but the ending was also not that great. But there are some extremely great visuals in this film. There are extremely brutal set pieces, like brutal kills, brutal set pieces. Just these um, characters that are actually interesting to watch, be killed, um, and I think that the hate that people feel for this film is warranted, but at the same time, if you look at it as because there are good pieces to this movie, I think that that's a more appropriate way to look at the film, than to just be like, yeah, I hate it because it's not good enough for a Halloween film. There are worse Halloween films. Okay, moving on to number 5, and that is Three from Hell. And what's crazy about this movie is it actually starts off really strong, and very enjoyable. It's got this, old school motif to it that a lot of his films do, and just the whole, like, them building like this documentary type setting at first, and then moving into the escape from prison, and then you get to the point where this family is about to be brutalized and massacred, and this could have been the strongest point for the film, except for Rob Zombie tried to play around with the show what happens, then go back to before it happens, and then play from there. But he does this multiple times, and it kind of broke it for me. I hated it. I absolutely hated it. And also, Sherry Moon Zombie is at her absolute best as an actress when she's playing the character Baby. In my opinion, I love that character, and I love the villains that Rob Zombie creates. And then you get to the end of this film, and it just turns into this um, weird action flick uh, with the three of them as kind of the action heroes of the story. And it just feels kind of just bad. I like the third act of this film is just not good. I mean, it's not okay. It's not terrible, but Rob Zombie has this weird way of making his villains and the terrible people very relatable, and almost makes you forget how terrible they actually are. And but you keep going back and forth with this. Oh yeah, they're terrible. Relax. I like this dude. Oh my god, what did he just say? What did he just do? And he does a really good job with that. But the whole action flick uh, type thing at the end was just not for me. Not with these characters. These should be slasher horror, like, I guess not really slasher, just brutal, like just very brutal, destroy you characters. Um, Not, you know, Suicide Squad. That's what I was trying to think of. Like, these are not Suicide Squad characters. They could be, but I would want that movie set up from the beginning to kind of know what I'm getting into, instead of thinking this is going to be, you know, another Devil's Rejects or House of a Thousand Corpses. And you just, all three movies just have such different feel to them, and that could be a good thing or a bad thing depending on the film series. I mean, if you take, you know, Shaun of the Dead, Hot Fuzz, and At World's End, you know, it's a great trilogy of movies, but At World's End, by the time you get to that movie, and it's so much different than the other two, and it's especially after Shaun of the Dead and Hot Fuzz, which are two of the greatest movies ever made. At World's End just kind of falls short, and so does Three from Hell. And at number 4 is House of a Thousand Corpses. And when I first saw this movie, I actually saw it in theaters when it came out, I believe in 2003. So when I first saw it, I did not like this movie. And me and my friend Jeff called it House of a Thousand Craps, which is not clever, but we were pretty young at the time. So it so I didn't like this movie, and before I rewatched it, I tried to remember why I did not like this film. And I was like, and everything that I remembered from the film, I was like, well, like, that was actually a kind of cool scene. That character was pretty cool. Like, what did I not like about this movie? So I rewatched it, and the beginning of this film is fantastic. It has an extremely great cast of characters in it, which I know I just talked about these movies, but, you know, Lords of Salem, Halloween 2, and Three from Hell. Rob Zombie does so good at getting a fantastic cast for all of his films, and he also reuses a lot of the same cast in a lot of his films. But yeah, he reuses a lot of actors in a lot of his films, and I do really like that. And they're all very strong actors. Um, I don't think that uh, Sherry Moon Zombie is a bad actor, but she is probably the weakest typically in the movies that he's making. And it does show when she is the weakest whenever she is typically one of the leading roles in most of his movies. House of a Thousand Corpses, she's not really a very major leading role uh, as much as she is in some of his other films. But yeah, so I'm watching this movie and I'm like, man, I really like the beginning. I love it when they get to the house. Like, I love these characters. Why did I not like this movie? And I keep going. I'm enjoying every second of it. And then it gets to the end of the film, and there's these weird cyborgs and a doctor cyborg dude with these crazy mechanical arms just sitting there. It's so out of place, especially for, like, this backwoods psycho cult family that, like, killer family. And it's just so out of place. It doesn't belong. They don't even, like, bring it up again in the next two films. It ruins the movie. And then that's when I realized, oh yeah, the end of this movie made me walk out of the theater going, that was one of the dumbest things I've ever watched in my life. Rewatching it, I can appreciate the 90% of this movie that was actually a really decent horror film, especially for his first film ever to make. I love the fact that Rob Zombie, he's always sampled old movies dialogue in a lot of his music, and he truly loves the film industry, classic cinema, and he uses a lot of those tropes, and especially in this movie, House of a Thousand Corpses, the way a lot of things are shot like old 70s and 80s horror films. And the only gripe I have about a ton of his movies are his still frame screen transitions. And I'm just like, oh my god, can you like do that like maybe once or twice each movie instead of 10,000 times, please? But other than that, this is actually a pretty solid film until the very end of the movie, and then it's just dumb. And now moving on to number 3, and that is the movie 31, which is another film that I see a lot of people give him a lot of flack for, and I don't understand why on this one. I do on some of the other ones. Like, this isn't the greatest movie ever made or anything, but this has some just extremely interesting villains, a pretty interesting concept, like, in the way that it's carried out is very interesting. Very visceral and real, and like when people die in Rob Zombie films, it is a lot more believable, because they're not dying just immediately. They're like, if unfortunately I have been in a room with a dying person before, and people don't die slow, and or don't die fast. It's not fast, and like when the first killer gets stabbed in the back of the head with some nails. He's on the ground, and his body starts convulsing. That is far more realistic than, a ton of other films. And Rob Zombie does a really good job of making scenes like that far more realistic than most other people would. And maybe that's what puts people off, is that it's so visceral and too much at times, with how brutal and dark and twisted a lot of his stuff is. But people just talk about this movie just being trash. And I mean, Doomhead is such a fantastic character. Sickhead, whenever one of the characters on the side of the gate, and he keeps scraping his knife against the fence, saying, "Open this fence! Open the gate! Open the gate! Let's go! Let's go!" And like every time he scrapes the knife against the fence, like I feel it in my chest, And it's just done. Small things like that Rob Zombie does very well, and it's fun and entertaining to watch those types of scenes and get that emotional response from those scenes, to me. And Doomhead is really cool. I think it was Schizo and Psycho Head that were that whole sequence with them, with the chainsaws chasing people, was pretty interesting. And then Sex Head, she, when the lights are flashing, just the look in her eyes would be terrifying, to like see somebody stalking you, looking at you this way. And it's all like done fantastic. But yes, I understand some of the complaints with this movie, but I don't think this movie is nearly as bad as a lot of people make it out to be. Alright, moving on to number 2. And these last two films I think are objectively actually good movies. And I love both of these films. But number 2 is Devil's Rejects. And like I said, the clown, Baby, and Otis, these are fantastic, just psychopath characters, realized villains, like, that draw so much attention when they're on the screen, especially Otis. Otis is really great in this and in Three from Hell and in House of a Thousand Corpses. That character draws so much attention to him and is played so well. But Devil's Rejects is another one of those films where Rob Zombie has taken these villains and made them human and relatable, and even though they're monsters, you forget that at times when you're watching this. And it's done that the way that he can do that, and just have these just crazy, barbaric, brutal, vicious scenes, and still 10 minutes later you forget that happened. I mean, you didn't really forget, but you start to empathize and like the characters, and then you go like, oh, like you have to stop yourself and go like, okay, these are terrible human beings and they need to die, like. And The sheriff in this is one of my absolute favorite characters, also in all of these films, and he helps elevate the counterpoint to these villains because he is not a hero. He is most definitely an anti-hero, on the verge of becoming a villain himself. And it's so it's Rob Zombie brings the human element to his characters, unlike almost anybody in this business. These are raw, flawed, messed up people that have more in common with reality than 99% of Hollywood made films. And The Devil's Rejects, I think, is the one movie out of all his that really realizes that point. And at number one, you guessed it, it is Rob Zombie's Halloween 1. And this is my this is my favorite Halloween film. The first segment of this film, with young Michael, is so absolutely amazing. And that child played that character in one of the most perfect ways that a young actor could. The clown mask that he uses is probably creepier than any Michael mask in the entire series. The brutal way that he just takes out his victims is just so good. So good. And then you get him into the psych ward with him interacting with his mother and slowly evolving his masks, making these different masks, and they're slowly evolving until he is an adult and he's got the mask, his newest mask on, as they're transferring him to the new prison. And then you get out of that point, and it's basically it is not a frame, like not a shot for shot recreation of the original, but it is it has enough scenes from the original for it to be a recreation, but it is completely reimagined. It is far more brutal, far more intense and terrifying, and the characters are just absolutely fantastic. It's got just an amazing cast, and after watching this film and then watching his second Halloween film, it's hard to understand what went wrong in his head when making the second film, because this one was just done so perfectly. And because of that, I do understand why people get frustrated with the second film. But this movie is so good. This is my absolute favorite Halloween movie, and it is my favorite Rob Zombie film. And people are probably going to hate me for it being my favorite Halloween movie. Probably not that bad, because it is still a good Halloween film to a lot of people. But yeah, that's my list. If you liked it, please leave a like, please subscribe. If you didn't like it, that's cool too. Leave a comment. tell me how you felt. And yeah, y'all have a great night.